the next episode on a guy who the WWE has definitely featured him in the past, but he had a career outside that for a long period of time and a few interesting stories. Mr. USA Tony Atlas.
Yes. Yep.
And and now Tony's still alive and kicking and around with us. So the story isn't all that dark and gloomy, but he's gone through some shit in his career to
Yes.
say the least.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, Tony says, Hogan had told him once that, he's one of the only wrestlers he had seen that had worked his way from the top to the bottom. That is,
I don't know. I've known a few of those also.
I'm sure there's a few others. Yeah. But he, that is kind of his story. I mean, Tony's autobiography is, too much too soon is what he calls it. And he kind of came in with this incredible body. He was a bodybuilder turned wrestler and came in with this amazing physique and was given a lot of opportunities out of the gate. And again, he just kind of had this emotional volatility. And of course, it's like sort of obligatory mention of, his shoe fetish, which, is actually according to Tony, like a bigger, it played a bigger part into his career trajectory than I would have thought. He talks about, for those who don't know, I mean, Tony, likes to be walked on quite often by women wearing, platform shoes.
But not promoters. Promoters can't walk on it, but the women wearing the big shoes.
Yeah, I've seen it firsthand before, many times.
Or first foot.
First foot, exactly. Excuse me. But it's something as he says in the episode, like, he would no-show events out of the temptation of an opportunity to get walked on, and that was sort of his happy place, his place of, that's how he de-stresses, and so that played a big part into him missing a lot of opportunities, according to himself.
Well, and also for people who might not be familiar because they see his body, but they think, oh, Superstar Graham and those other bodybuilders at the time, they, were California and they're on Muscle Beach. Tony White is his real name, and
Yep.
he grew up outside of Roanoke, Virginia, in a little small town and dirt poor. And
Yep.
he managed to build that body and that reputation and start winning what was a teenage,
Yep.
contests with nothing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, genetically, obviously he was gifted, but just the work that he put into that. And that's what led the promoters to notice him.
Yep.
And he broke in there in the Carolinas of the 1970s. Everybody knows that was the place where every major NWA talent and every top in-ring worker and a blah, 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 they were flocking there.
Mm-hmm.
So he got in with, I mean, he's working with Ric Flair and Andre the Giant, people like this in his rookie year. He had a lot of people there to teach him. I have some of the films and have seen, saw him early on. It was rough at the start, but he had an amazing athleticism for a guy that size.
Yeah.
But the point is, too much too soon. A guy that goes from, lifting paint cans on a broomstick or whatever because he
Mhm.
can't even afford barbells. And suddenly those guys on top of the Carolinas in the 70s were making a couple or $3,000 a week.
Exactly.
That's boom. Then that goes. And I'll pitch it back to you with this classic story. His rookie year, he's in the locker room in the Carolinas. And somebody looks over and sees Tony, and he's got a bottle of baby oil, and he's pouring the whole goddamn bottle of baby oil over all around his head, his neck, and his shoulders, his chest. And they said, "What are you doing?" And his accent like that, we talk like that because he's that Virginia. He said, "They tell me I got to shine tonight because old man Crockett's here."
Oh man.
So it was a learning experience there.
Right, right.
Very, very a lot very soon. But go ahead.
Well, as you were saying, I mean, he came, from this upbringing, that he had, and he was a fighter, having to, he got into a lot of fights as a kid, and he came from, not a great section of town, and He had a lot to prove. And I think that coming from, his sort of socioeconomic background and then coming into the wrestling business and making all of this money very quickly and not really knowing, how to save or, what he should do with it. I mean, he was just that money came in and went immediately out, and I think that's obviously he's not the only wrestler who had that sort of issue, but
Right.
I think that was a big part of it. And, for him though, this episode definitely also gets into, he also struggled with addiction and he had kind of a downward spiral and his career, fizzled out and he became homeless and he was living on the street for periods of time. And then he met his wife, who basically essentially saved him, from living on the streets and brought him in and took care of him. Vince called him back and had brought him back as Saba Simba, and he had that experience of kind of seeing the bottom, and what's kind of heartwarming to see, and not to spoil it or anything, but his wife has suffered a stroke, I think, in the last few years, and he's been taking care of her like day in and day out. And so to see that, just the relationship that they still have to this day is very moving. And so that's something people will see, which is cool.